All across the world we find the same story. Once there were gods, and these gods bred with men, creating a race of demigod heroes. Throughout history, kings, prophets, and entire peoples claimed descent from such heroes to justify their authority as conquerors, rulers, and religious leaders. The Spartans claimed descent from Hercules, son of Zeus, as did Alexander the Great. In the Aeneid, Virgil traces the ancestry of the Romans back to Aeneas, son of Venus, as did Julius Caesar. Jesus claimed to be the son of God, and well into the Middle Ages, monarchs claimed to be descended from classical demigods ordained by God himself. Were their claims arbitrary, or could the idea of divine descent be based on a distant memory? From the archaeological record, we know that there were once many species of hominids on this planet. And from the genetic record, we know that we interbred with several of them, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans. Could our mythologies of demigods, trolls, and giants be the memory of a distant time when the Earth was populated by many strange breeds of hominids? The myth of the interbreeding between gods and men, and the creation of demigods and giants, is intimately linked with the myth of the Great Flood. We find nearly identical flood myths in Greek mythology, the Bible, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains the oldest version. In all versions, the gods, for various reasons, become angry with mankind and decide to wipe them from the face of the earth. But a man and his wife survive the flood in an ark. The appearance of this myth in the Greek, Hebrew, and Sumerian traditions is easily explainable due to their proximity, yet we find similar myths in Hindu mythology and the Americas. These similarities could be explained several ways. They could, of course, just be symbolic and narrative coincidences, or they could have been diffused across the globe from one source. Though historians are still resistant to this idea, it is likely that people learned to sail many thousands of years before we believe that they did. This is the most likely explanation for the arrival of people in the Americas and Australia. Small wooden vessels, which we know peoples like the Vikings used to navigate the ocean, would leave little trace many thousands of years later. So the myth of the flood could have spread through migration, trade, and travel. Graham Hancock presents another possibility. He believes that the flood myths are a memory of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, during which the Earth was bombarded by meteors for over 100 years, leading to massive flooding. The Younger Dryas climate catastrophe took place around 11,000 BC, precisely when Egyptian records said that Atlantis disappeared, at least according to Plato. In the Greek flood myth, Prometheus teaches the arts of civilization and technology to mankind, and it is his son, Deucalion, who builds the ark and preserves mankind and the arts of Prometheus. In the Sumerian myth, Enki plays a similar role to Prometheus, and in the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels teach mankind the arts of civilization, thereby corrupting them. Graham Hancock proposes that this myth represents the bearers of a past civilization which was relatively advanced, but destroyed in the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. Graham Hancock often gives the example of our civilization being destroyed by meteors, and a few of us surviving among various uncontacted hunter-gatherer tribes. Would they remember us as gods who bestowed the arts of civilization upon them? Perhaps, but to me these myths feel older than 11,000 BC. They are intimately connected with the creation of man, and speak of a time when gods, giants, and demigods walked the earth among us. In the case of the Prometheus myth, they speak of man's discovery of fire, of cooking meat, of agriculture, and astronomy, all things which we surely knew long before 11,000 BC. These myths smell to me of the ancient past. Is it possible that these myths are as old as man, as old as language, preserved over tens of thousands of years, spread with mankind across the globe? Could these myths be our most ancient history? All of the flood myths say that the gods were dissatisfied with mankind, but the Hebrew flood myth provides a much stranger and more disturbing reason for the cause of the flood. In Genesis 6, the reason for the flood is mentioned only briefly. Quote, "And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took them as wives, whoever they chose. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God took the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, who became the mighty men of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe man who I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it pains me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." End quote. This passage leads us to believe that the wickedness of man was the reason that God decided to wipe out mankind, and that Noah's justice was the reason he was saved. Because of the rest of the Bible's emphasis on morality, we would presume that wickedness and justice are used here as moral valuations. Mankind was acting poorly and evilly, but Noah and his generations behaved morally and did not sin. The strange mention of giants and the sons of God mating with human women seems like an unrelated aside. However, when we read Genesis 6 in the context of biblical texts which are not included in the Standard Bible, we learn that it is actually the interbreeding between angels, sons of God, and human women which is the cause of the flood. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a collection of biblical texts, including the well-known Book of Enoch, which were found in a cave in Qumran in the 1940s. Carbon dating provides a wide range of dates between 400 BC and 60 BC for when the various scrolls were written down, but that of course does not speak to how old the stories are. The scrolls provide a lot of material which is not included in the Bible, for example the rebellion of the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch. The so-called Genesis Apocryphon elaborates on the stories of Noah and Abraham, which are surprisingly written in the first person. Much of the Genesis Apocryphon is simply the retelling of the stories of Noah and Abraham, but we also get a more detailed elaboration on Genesis 6 and the cause of the flood. In the book of Lamech, Noah's father, Lamech, fears that his wife is pregnant with a child of one of the holy ones, Watchers or Nephilim. Quote, "And when the time of her labor came, she gave birth, and out came a child of disturbing appearance. His appearance was like an angel. His body was white as snow and red as the blooming of a rose, and the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes beautiful. And when he opened his eyes, light shone from his eyes, and he lit up the entire house like the light of the sun, and the whole house was very bright. And her son was being held in the hands of a midwife, but he suddenly arose from her hands and opened his mouth and began to speak and began to praise Elohim and speak to him as a son speaks to a father. Then I considered whether the pregnancy was due to the Watchers and Holy Ones or should be ascribed to the Nephilim, and I grew perturbed about this child." End quote. Lamech demands that his wife tell him truthfully whether she conceived with one of the Watchers holy ones, or Nephilim, and she denies it in tears, swearing that the child is his. Lamech then goes to seek counsel from his grandfather Enoch, who is in direct communication with the Watchers. With the added context of the Book of Lamech, we can gather that the sons of God, who were taking human wives in Genesis 6, are the holy ones and Watchers, and that the children which came from their coupling with human women have superhuman powers. Interpretations of the Genesis 6 passage have traditionally asserted that the giants, or Nephilim, are the sons of angels and human women, but this does not seem to be the case. It is the mighty men of old, men of renown, who are the sons of angels and human women. This sounds an awful lot like a reference to the demigods of Greek mythology, born from the coupling of gods and mortal women. But in the Genesis Apocryphon, these demigod children are to be feared and scorned. In the Book of Noah, we learn that Noah was chosen to survive the flood because he kept his generations pure from interbreeding with angels. Noah says, quote, "From corruption and in my mother's womb I swelled for the sake of righteousness. When I emerged from the womb of my mother I was planted for righteousness, and during all my days I conducted myself righteously and walked in the paths of eternal truth. And I bound my loins with the vision of righteousness and wisdom. Then I, Noah, became an adult. I held firmly to righteousness, and I took hold. I held firmly to righteousness, and Mamzer's daughter I took as my wife. I impregnated her, and she bore to me 3 sons and daughters." End quote. Noah's description of his own righteousness places emphasis on reproduction. He was righteous in his mother's womb, and when he matured, he bound his loins in righteousness. He righteously took a human wife, and the passage later says that he married his daughters to human men. When we now return to the explanation in Genesis as to why Noah was saved from the flood, it is clear that Noah is chosen to survive because he kept his generations from becoming corrupted through interbreeding with Watchers and holy ones. Quote, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." End quote. It also becomes clear that the reason for the flood was the interbreeding between angels and men, which is viewed as deviating from the eternal law of God. Again, one must wonder about a distant prehistory when the earth was populated by all kinds of hominids, and interbreeding between them was common. Yet the books of Enoch, Lamech, and Noah seem to point to a past even stranger than that. They are ripe for theories about ancient aliens, interplanetary overlords, and genetic engineering. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a collection of truly surreal and haunting literature, and I suggest you check them out. The implications of the Genesis Apocryphon on the New Testament are quite interesting. During the time of Jesus, the Jews had very strict marriage and purity laws. The ritual act of washing, which is the origin of baptism, was essential to the Hebrew religion, and was practiced after contact with blood or anything else which could make one impure. Anyone born out of wedlock, to incest, or through any other illegitimate means was considered an impure Mamzer and shunned from temples and holy places. Could Jesus, born out of wedlock, have been considered a Mamzer? Would this explain why he was shunned from temples and holy places? Could his claim that he was the Son of God be even more heretical than we know, since interbreeding between divine beings and humans was considered to be a corruption and the cause of the flood? This could explain why Jesus led a revolution against the purity laws of the Hebrews, saying that no matter how impure you were, whether prostitute, leper, or sinner, through baptism you could have communion with God. Yet long before Jesus, a similar revolution had occurred in Athens. The Greek aristocracies had justified their right to rule through their divine lineage. They ruled because they had the blood of demigods, and therefore of the gods themselves, coursing through their veins. But the democratic movement overturned the aristocracy. Socrates, though not a democrat, was a critic of the gods and the old aristocracy, or at least appears to have been, and Socrates' friend Euripides attacks the gods and the notion of divine descent in his plays. Some memory of the divine right to rule remained in the European aristocracies up until the French Revolution, but now any such notion is gone. The time when angels and gods interbred with humans, when demigods and giants walked the earth, is but a distant memory. But could such a time be coming again? One of the greatest problems we face in the West today is the health crisis. Obesity and disease are rampant due to poor food quality. Our food is filled with toxins, inflammatory vegetable and seed oils, and saturated with pesticides and preservatives. The shift we are seeing now is 1,000 times more drastic and momentous than the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture, which itself brought a significant decrease in health, which we still feel to this day. For example, the need for braces and the removal of wisdom teeth is common today, and it is a direct result of our soft diets, which cause underdeveloped jaws and facial structure. This has been an issue ever since we transitioned to agriculture, though it is probably becoming increasingly exacerbated. But the consequences we face now are far worse than that. We are facing mass infertility, shortened lifespans, and drastically decreased quality of life due to our diets and lifestyles. Someone who eats well, works out, and communes with nature will appear as a demigod compared with those who fall victim to obesity, disease, and a sedentary life. And with our excellent knowledge of diet and nutrition, our ability to supplement, and soon, perhaps, the ability to enhance our bodies with technology, or even alter ourselves with gene editing and genetic engineering, we may soon see a future in which the earth is walked again by many strange breeds of man. At minimum, there will be a drastic divide between those who strive to become superhuman in their abilities, and those who succumb to the poisons and comforts of modern civilization. The aristocracies of the future may not be populated by the children of gods and angels, but they will be populated by those who manage to preserve their vitality and humanity against the polluting forces of modernity. One day, demigods may walk the earth again, and you, or perhaps your children, or your children's children, could be among their ranks. The greatest virtue today is to preserve your body and your family from corruption, to keep your body vital and healthy, and preserve your family, friends, and children from falling prey to poor lifestyle choices which could destroy them. Your body is divine. It is a well of ancient wisdom and superhuman vitality, just waiting to be tapped. Do not let the modern world rob you of it. A flood is coming, and you are the ark.